Hello class, this week we are also discussing performance management, which is another fascinating topic in human resources. Now, performance management is the process of creating a work environment where people can perform to the best of their abilities. Within performance management, we have performance evaluations, which are the result of an annual, sometimes biannual process where a manager evaluates an employee's performance. We're seeing a lot of different trends in the performance evaluations. We see a lot of self-evaluations currently as well, so we'll get into some of that. Now, we conduct performance evaluations for two main reasons. One is for developmental purposes, so that is actually to provide that performance feedback to the employee, maybe identify some of their strengths and their weaknesses, to recognize their performance achievements, help achieve their goals or help identify those goals. Also to identify any individual training needs that they might have. So there's a lot of things under the developmental piece that we can do. The other side of the house is the administrative piece, and very often managers just think of that administrative piece as what we've seen in the past. We're having a shift where managers are now enjoying that and wanting to do that developmental piece, but very often performance evaluations have been connected to that administrative piece. We need to document if there's poor performance, or we need to document so we can give them a raise. So that is what that administrative piece is. We use it to promote employees or to determine any transfers or other assignments that they might need. We also use it administratively to identify any performance problems or develop ways to correct them. So those are just a couple of those examples. There are several types of performance evaluations, like I mentioned. We have a manager or supervisor evaluation, and that is exactly what it sounds like, where the employee's manager or whoever supervises them actually does that evaluation. We have self-evaluations that are conducted by the employee being evaluated on an evaluation form, and it's completed by the employee prior to the meeting. So very often we see employees do a self-evaluation and then managers do the evaluation, and then they compare them. So that's very common as well. We see some companies and some industries like to do subordinate evaluations, and this is when a colleague of theirs conducts that evaluation. Peer evaluations is conducted by an employee's fellow peers. Team evaluations are also very popular, and this recognizes that team accomplishments rather than the individual performance. Customer evaluations contribute to the evaluation, the performance evaluation as well. Now, the 360-degree evaluation is an accumulation of all of them. So it's conducted by different people who interact with the employee on forms that are compiled in a single profile. So we have the employee does their own self-evaluation, we have the manager, we have their peers, we have their customers. So just everybody that touches that individual does that 360 evaluation. Now, it helps. Some things that we want to be careful of when we do the 360 is to ensure anonymity. You're not going to get honest feedback if it's not completely confidential. We also want to make respondents accountable. So if there's no consequences for not completing it, chances are they're not going to, because one, it's a lot of work, and two, they're evaluating somebody that they might work right next to, and that sometimes can be uncomfortable if the culture doesn't embrace it. We also want to make sure we prevent gaming the system. And what I mean by that is we don't want, hey, you give me a good feedback, I'll give you good feedback. So we want it to be an accurate representation of the employee's performance rather than I'll help you out if you help me out. Now, we have different methods on how we can conduct those different types of evaluations. The trait approaches is based on people's characteristics, and they continue to be used despite their subjectivity. Now, behavioral approaches provide more action-oriented information. It's based on the actual behavior of the employees. And then results are focused on the measurable contributions that the employee makes to the organization. A couple of other trait methods that we use is a graphic rating scale. This is where each employee is rated according to a scale of characteristics. Our mixed standard scale is similar to other scales, but is based on a comparison with a standard. Our fourth choice requires the rater to choose from statements designed to distinguish from the successful and unsuccessful performance. And finally, we have the essay method, and that requires the rater to write a statement about the employee's performance. So we often see the rating piece and an essay method where they have to explain the why they gave that type of rating. So that's very common. From a behavior-based methods, we have a couple that we see quite often. One is the critical incident, and this is when unusual events denote the superior or inferior performance of the employee. The behavioral checklist method is when raters check the statements on a list that a rater believes are characteristics of the employee's behavior. Now, BARS, or behaviorally anchored rating system, consists of a series of vertical scales, one for each important dimension of the job performance. And then we have our behavior observation scale, or BOS. This measures the frequency of that observed behavior. Now, from a results methods perspective, we want to focus on productivity measures, so measures that are directly linked to what the employee has accomplished and how that benefits the organization. A very common results method is what we call MBO, or management by objectives. This is the philosophy of management that rates employees based on the achievement of goals that's mutually set by the employee and the manager. So it's not just the manager deciding on the goals, but it's the both of them deciding on it. There are a few legal guidelines we want to take into consideration. First and foremost, performance ratings must be job related. Employees must be given a written copy of their job performance as well, and managers who conduct the evaluation must actually observe that behavior. It couldn't be the supervisor observing it and then the manager writing it, for example. That's not acceptable. We do not want to allow performance problems to continue to go unchecked, so we're not going to wait until the annual review to point that out. If we see a problem, we should fix it right then and there. And then supervisors and managers must be trained to use whichever evaluation form the company utilizes. A firm's HR department should review the evaluations to make sure there's no minority groups that are being adversely impacted, intentionally or unintentionally. Evaluations should be discussed openly with the employees, and counsel offer to help those poor performers. And then lastly, the appeals procedure should be established to enable employees to express disagreement if they don't agree with the evaluation. So those are some of the types, the methods of evaluations, and some legal guidelines for those evaluations.